The act of brewing and consuming beer among many Southern African cultures is a multi-layered activity. Not only does it produce a refreshing beverage that can be enjoyed at any number of gatherings and celebrations, but the fermented drink is central to the maintenance of social and spiritual relationships. Among many South Sotho peoples residing in the Free State Province of South Africa, as well as the Kingdom of Lesotho, the brewing of sorghum beer, or Joala, occurs at any significant phase of life and highlights social continuity by inviting the spirits of the deceased to take part in the event. It is an act of sacrifice that honors the ancestors and brings together the spirits of the past with those living in the present. It was during my field research in 2008 that I was invited by Maria Mofokeng to view the brewing process in its entirety. Both she and her daughter-in-law, Rosalina, demonstrated this complex activity and explained its social and spiritual significance. Before we explore the various steps in the beer-making process, it is important to note that it is both labor-intensive and time-consuming. We will see that it is completely made by hand and is a strictly gendered activity with the women of the house overseeing the entire operation. This in itself is very significant and points to the importance of women in the maintenance of spiritual bonds between generations past and the living. The process is started by grinding sorghum, or mabele, on a stone called lelwala. This culinary instrument has been used for centuries among many South Sotho populations and is still a very effective and efficient domestic tool. In the case of beer making, this activity prepares the sorghum grains for brewing and ensures a successful batch. Although historically the sorghum was grown and harvested by the community, today it is commercially grown and packaged and can be purchased at virtually any grocery store. Presently, it is available in 1 kilogram packages, which is a convenient amount for producing 20 liters of beer. Historically, the lelwala was always accompanied by a stiff grass mat called sitebe, which caught the processed grains as they fell from the stone. The sitebe, like all art forms that were used in the home, was made by women and is comprised of specific grasses for both the warp and weft. Although the lelwala is still widely used today, the sitebe is often replaced with durable polypropylene bags in which maize meal is typically sold. While the sorghum is being processed, one can see that the foam from a former batch is being removed from the surface of the liquid. This substance will be set aside and dried out, resulting in a coarse solid that is later added to new batches of beer and is said to function as a type of yeast during the fermentation phase. We will see how this substance is added to Mrs. Mofokeng's current batch of beer toward the end of the process. The next step includes combining the granulated sorghum with approximately 5 cups of ground corn or maize meal, which is also commercially available. The mixture is then transferred to another container and hot water is added. The contents are left to sit for approximately 4 to 5 hours, softening the ingredients and preparing them for the next phase of the process. Metsi? Okay.
Kia batang wa buskasha wa kia chisa. Ya go lokile tereta profiskash. Soka ha. So ke le mo, le tswa ha wa se profis.
Wa sa berekisi ditso.
Soka heje tira sopa ndela. Titla mango futhi.
After the required amount of time has passed for the ingredients to soften, the mixture is cooked until boiling. Typically, a fire is made using fuel of cow dung called disu, which burns very efficiently and is often readily available. Although the ingredients for making sorghum beer are always stone ground indoors, highlighting the sacred interior space of the home, Mrs. Mofokeng brought the process outdoors for the sake of filming. In contrast, the cooking always takes place outdoors. This is not only for practical reasons, but allows the smoke to saturate the domestic courtyard as a type of offering to the ancestors.
And the fuel is at Disu.
Yeah.
During this phase, the liquid part of the mixture is first brought to a boil while the heavier sediment is left in its container. This assists in allowing the water to boil quickly and ensures that the heavier grains will not burn at the bottom of the kettle. After the water has been brought to a boil, the remaining sediment is added and is cooked for approximately 20 minutes.
I saw me taking it c'est pampage. Non, là. Et c'est là où il est. Bye, Faith. J'ai la bec fait il y a fait. Il y a que ça qui est on a fait. Ne le dites pas. A beaucoup de khatela. Nda twa mo hae Joala ya le clip sel ba ta bona se khata. e tlhokagise a sa le fatshe a ke na bona bjale mo he ke tshela metsi a bile metsi a re nke wo ke ne se letsa bona no na bila metsi a ke ka khobe tse re tshela ka ngwana le di butswa di nka di jwa Wale herike ke mela o tse bumele ha ke
Lisa.
ke se tshota ho re pile metsi
So now I think it's ready.
Okay.
Okay.
While the main ingredients are cooking, a small amount of malted corn is also brought to a boil. This whole kernel corn was first placed into a container with cold water and left to sit for approximately 1 week. It was then transferred to a burlap bag, which was closed and placed outside for approximately 2 weeks. This allowed the kernels to sprout, or malt, which is a necessary step for brewing beer. The malt is then brought to a boil in order to soften it up for processing.
ai pe Wakil kwa ba le ke
Kira tse tse kan ke di bulunyana so.
ke ho ha ke bo mtsifanya a ke kono re ke ya butswa jara go tsifanya tse tse saideng
After the main ingredients have cooked for the necessary amount of time, the mixture is removed from the fire and allowed to slowly cool. It is during this cooling period that the malt is typically prepared, after it has softened sufficiently. Because the art of brewing beer is one that is learned by experience, oftentimes elder women will lend their expertise. In this case, Mrs. Mofokeng's neighbor, Josephine Hetebe, came to offer her assistance to the younger woman.
Is it ready? Or not yet? Soon.
O ka no dija di le so.
ke a re ke je ke ya ka ba
Ke ra hore ha o rata o ka nna dija.
tse ko no phelo mo etsa dikgopo
Although at present it is not uncommon to find men brewing sorghum beer, historically this was seen as women's work, along with all other activities taking place in and around the home. Although this type of gendered division may appear to be outmoded, In reality, the domestic space among the South Sotho is the seat of female authority, whereas the cattle corral, or lesaka, as well as the local seat of governance, or khotla, are strictly male spaces. Such gendered spaces create a social framework in which both men and women properly function and provide both genders the opportunity to access the spiritual realm and maintain relations with the ancestors. Among Sotho speakers, one's ancestors, or badimu, are often seen as active participants in daily life and function as agents of God, or mudimu. Upon the death of a Masutu, one immediately joins the ancestors, all of whom ensure the good ordering of social relationships among the living and the fertility and well-being of humans, crops, and animals. Because of this, beer was, and still is, essential at every feast and occasion, and literally serves as food for the ancestors. It is standard protocol for all important events, playing a central role in maintaining positive relationships with the spirits of the past, as it serves to honor and remember them, and ensures their attention and blessings upon a particular occasion. After the malt is cooked, it is ready to be ground. Because of the size and texture of the kernels, this process can be difficult and takes practice to become efficient. In the case of Mrs. Mofokeng, she once again defers to the expertise of someone who is more experienced and observes the proper techniques. While it remains true that the home is the seat of domestic duties, including child rearing and food preparation, many acts of communion with the ancestors take place within these female spaces and are overseen by women. For example, one will often find specific areas within the home that are believed to be visited by badimu and are recognized as sacred sites. Often, these particular areas include a low earthen platform upon which any number of domestic utensils are stored. This earthen shelf, called mohalwane, is typically used to store clay vessels such as morifi, lefisu, and mopochwana, all of which were primarily used for preparing and serving beer. In the same manner, women are historically the artists who create these objects whose contextual use gives honor to these powerful beings. Because the spirits of the past have the ability to directly influence both human and agricultural fertility, it should come as no surprise that South Sotho women are responsible for creating these vessels and maintaining important relationships for the family and community. This artistic engendering is carried out in contemporary times as well, as it is believed that one's ancestors may have a hard time recognizing commercially made containers. In addition, the mohalwane often serves as the site where the first portion of freshly brewed joala is placed in order to respectfully provide badimu with their share of this refreshing drink. This takes place toward the end of the brewing process, when the sorghum beer is left to ferment overnight before the dregs are strained out. These specific sites within the home are said to be familiar to one's ancestors, and the earthenware vessels are believed to attract their presence. While many South Sotho homes include the mohalwane, some commercially built homes simply have a specific room or area that function as a site of spiritual communion. These particular locations were overlooked and misunderstood by 19th century missionaries working among the South Sotho, who noted the lack of sacred sites within the community. However, they failed to realize that Sotho religious practice did not include any institutions through which to differentiate the sacred from the ordinary, but in reality maintained a nuanced relationship between the spiritual and the everyday. After the main mixture has cooled, it is often split, and a portion is removed from the kettle and placed into a smaller, more portable container where it will continue to cool. This speeds up the overall cooling process, especially when cooking large amounts of beer.
Only one go down. Only one. Go la shafa.
Although beer production presently utilizes a number of commercially made utensils, such as iron pots, enamel bowls, and plastic buckets, beer was formerly produced and stored in clay vessels. While many contemporary South Sotho families now only use clay pots for serving and drinking beer, it is important to note the significance of earthenware vessels as vehicles of spiritual communion. Because the earth is viewed as the dwelling place of the ancestors, the clay pots, which themselves are made from earth, can be seen as spiritually significant. As a result, portions of beer are still often served to the ancestors in clay pots and gourd containers, both of which have direct links to the earth. By using these time-honored vessels, as well as new technologies, one can recognize both continuity and change in the beer-making process. In addition, the brewing of sorghum beer also addresses Sotho concepts of heat. Among the South Sotho, heat, or hotness, is seen as both dangerous and powerful, and special steps are taken when an individual becomes hot. Such heat-inducing instances include pregnancy, attending a funeral, or even smearing one's walls with a mixture of earth and dung. However, it is important to note that one of the most powerful influences centers on female reproduction. Historically, when a woman was menstruating, she remained in her home in order to confine the heat that was emanating from her body. The heat linked with menstruation was seen as being so powerful that it was believed to have the ability to kill plant life, crops, and even livestock. Likewise, during the birthing process, the blood expelled during delivery was carefully absorbed and disposed of in order to protect members of the community from its heat and power. Just as the womb is seen as generating heat through the process of reproduction, the brewing process also relies on heat to bring about a physical change. In the case of beer making, one can liken the heat of the fermentation process to that of human gestation. In both cases, a dramatic transformation takes place, whether in the form of new life or a strongly fermented beverage. Among the South Sotho, the womb is often considered to be an intestine or an organ physically connected to the intestines. This becomes very significant when one considers that the fatty, apron-like tissue covering the intestines is seen as the most sacred part of an animal that is given in offering to one's ancestors. This tissue, called Ancestral, is not only a symbol of prosperity, but derives its spiritual potency from the fact that it serves to blanket the womb and provide this life-producing organ with the heat of regeneration. The idea of heat and transformation in beer making also goes beyond the fermentation process. For example, when producing malt, corn is moistened and typically placed outdoors within a bag or blanket. The heat generated by the sun causes the kernels to sprout, effecting change and resulting in a new substance. The link between human fertility and the brewing process can be taken a step further when one considers the fact that Joala is considered the food of the ancestors, or badimu. It is the spirits of the past who are often credited with blessing a woman with offspring, thus linking this sacred beverage with the continuity of the family line. Furthermore, beer making is closely tied to the remaking of a person or a change in one's social status. For example, beer that has yet to be fermented is referred to as lekwele, the same term used to describe a Masutu youth who has yet to undergo initiation into adulthood. This process of initiation, or lebulo, also uses sorghum beer for a number of significant activities. For example, during the culminating event of this process, the male initiates are given letsepe, a type of medicated, unstrained beer. Just before dawn, each candidate takes a sip of this substance, holding it in their mouths without swallowing it. As the sun makes its first appearance over the horizon, the young men spew out the letsepe toward the east, greeting the dawn of their new life as men and referencing their virility. The next step in the process involves combining the main portion with the freshly ground malt. Although sorghum beer has been enjoyed for centuries across many cultures in southern Africa, its use and distribution took an interesting turn in the 20th century. Starting in 1928, legislation was passed that prohibited the majority of Africans living in South Africa from drinking what was referred to as European liquor. This essentially restricted black populations to drinking sorghum beer, which could be produced in lieu of purchasing commercial spirits. Prior to 1900, the production of sorghum beer was almost exclusively practiced in rural areas. However, as black populations began to increase in the urban areas of South Africa, local administrators sought to establish conditions by which one could enact social control. One method, which was established by the Native Beer Act of Natal in 1908, was to create a government monopoly on the production of sorghum beer. This legislation limited the production of traditional beer and confined its consumption to government-run beer halls. This greatly disrupted the social purposes behind the production and consumption of traditional beer, which was no longer fulfilling its spiritual purpose. Furthermore, the profits generated from the sale of sorghum beer was used to subsidize the upkeep and development of black urban areas, resulting in a sophisticated form of urban control at minimal cost to white property owners. Because urban municipalities were responsible for housing black populations living within their limits under the Native Urban Areas Act of 1923, new methods of generating revenue were of great interest. In some areas throughout South Africa, legislation was developed that prohibited black access to various types of alcohol as early as 1897. However, according to the Native Laws Amendment Act of 1937, urban municipalities could no longer enforce prohibition on black access to sorghum beer. Rather, municipalities were given the choice of either permitting the domestic brewing of beer, licensing individual black consumers, or adopting a municipal beer monopoly. When South Africa became a republic in 1961, a loss of its preferential trade status threatened the economics linked with wine and spirit exports. This led to the lifting of black prohibition in 1962 in hopes of boosting domestic sales. Scholars have also suggested that the ending of prohibition was hoped to draw attention away from the recently imposed political controls of the Bantu Authorities Act of 1959, as well as the banning of African nationalist organizations. After prohibition was lifted, European liquor was distributed at outlets run by the Bantu Areas Administration Boards in prescribed townships. In addition, the Sorghum Beer Act of 1962 reaffirmed the government monopoly in the production and distribution of sorghum beer and forbade the sale of home-brewed beer. Although legislation that was passed in subsequent years repealed a number of beer-related legal constraints, many government regulations still remain in place today. Presently, it is legal to brew sorghum beer in unlimited quantities for personal use, but a permit or license is required for the sale or trade of traditional beer. As we saw earlier in the process, the foam from a former batch of beer was removed and dried to a solid. This substance is often added to future batches of beer and functions as a type of yeast. Additional sorghum is also added, and the mixture is left to stand overnight. It is at this point that a small portion is set aside within the home as an offering to one's ancestors who have free access to the beverage throughout the night. As was highlighted earlier, this portion is placed in a specific area of the home using the spiritually significant clay or gourd vessels that are easily recognized by the ancestors and attract their presence. On the following day, the mixture is strained. Formerly, this was done using a grass strainer called a motlotlo, although more convenient methods are used today. After they have been removed, the dregs have no further use and are often discarded. As the newly strained liquid stands, the active ingredients will continue to bubble and ferment. At this point, the process is complete, and the remaining liquid is consumed by the family and guests, starting with the senior male members. Because the ancestors, who maintain the most senior status within the community, were already given their portion during the previous night, their eldest living descendants are the next to partake of the beverage. This seniority-based social protocol is strictly observed in Sotho culture and shows proper respect to both the living and the deceased. By continuing to follow such practices, the spirits of the past take pleasure in the maintenance of important historical ideals and are inclined to provide blessings for the living as they are invited to oversee and participate in the events of the day.
Dumelang hape
Dumela.
le kae?
Ke teng le kae?
Merdi.
The brewing of sorghum beer across southern Africa is a time-honored process that holds both practical and spiritual significance. Although it is highly labor-intensive, the process itself functions as a type of sacrifice and assists in maintaining positive relationships between the physical and spiritual realms. Whether it is used for celebrating an important event or invoking the favor of the ancestors, the production and use of sorghum beer is a unique expression of the diverse cultures of southern Africa.